Your understanding and appreciation of horror movies will improve dramatically when you start looking at the genre in terms of surface horror and hidden horror. Now, surface horror, as I describe it, is the obvious. It's the material, it's the eye-catching elements, and basically the aesthetics of a horror movie. But the hidden horror is the subtle, the represented but not spelled out fear that is a lot deeper and more disturbing. It's the stuff that really challenges your worldview and disturbs you on a deep level. In Halloween, for example, the surface horror is obvious. It is the masked maniac in the dark house with the stabby knife. The hidden horror, on the other hand, is a more subtle undermining of your sense of safety. It's the idea that violence is no longer a thing on the news, in a foreign country, in a war zone. It's something that's happening in your street, in your community. You're now seeing that your neighbours aren't going to help you. They're going to close their curtains when you try and get help from them. And you leave that film sort of wondering how safe you really are. In Eli Roth's Hostel, the surface horror is the impressive array of torture implements and the eye gouging. The hidden horror, on the other hand, is the American loss of status and the sophisticated legal apparatus of human rights being revealed as basically a fiction, a statutory comfort blanket that is torn away by the realities of power. The impressive 1974 proto-slasher Black Christmas explores the hidden horror of institutional corruption and, far more interestingly for my money, our children's vulnerability as they move out into the world as independent adults. At the same time, the film is also showcasing the obvious surface horror of women being allowed into university. Now, in a very different medium, the very impressive sci-fi series Black Mirror, in one of its most celebrated episodes, The Entire History of You, we have a great chance to dig deep and learn about surface and hidden horrors. If you ask me, the hidden horror is always going to be the more interesting of the two, because it's understated and it's really challenging our deepest assumptions, values and desires. And threatening them is what I think makes a horror movie a lot more memorable and, of course, effectively scary. Now, with no offense to any of these movies, I've watched and enjoyed a lot of them, you can pretty much swap out Michael Myers' kitchen knife with, well, basically any old implement, and it's really just an aesthetics change, just a small switch to the surface horror. But the hidden horror is absolutely fundamental to how the story unfolds and how it affects us, and, of course, what it's saying. I really can't think of a better way to showcase this concept than talking about this episode of Black Mirror, because the hidden horror in The Entire History of You cuts deeply and savagely into our current understanding of the world and really into who we are as people, right into our core. It's this hidden horror that makes this the scariest episode of Black Mirror that I ever oh no, wait, Last Thing's already used that title, didn't he? Balls. You might be quite familiar with Black Mirror generally and this episode in particular, and that's fine. I'm just going to lay out some of the basics so that the analysis makes sense. I'm setting the scene for everyone. So, The Entire History of You is the season 1 finale, and it's the only episode in the first season that wasn't written by series creator Charlie Brooker. Now, Brooker describes Black Mirror as being set 5 minutes into the future. That is, he's basically only making the technology depicted in the show a slight exaggeration, a tiny step away, a tiny advancement on stuff that we use already. In The Entire History of You, the only slightly exaggerated technology is the grain. It's an implant that goes in behind your ear, connects to your optic nerve and presumably your brain, and it records literally everything you see in super high def. It also then allows you to replay everything that you've seen, and also, disturbingly, cast it to screens. Now, we are currently using technology, social media, that records decades of message history. We are liberally archiving photos and videos of ourselves that capture the best of us. And we're also carrying around smartphones that are very capable of, and probably are, recording absolutely everything we say and do.
No, I'm not.
Okay. What I'm getting at is that this tech is only a slight exaggeration of our tendency to record a huge amount of ourselves and make it available. You know that people would want a grain if it were available. You know there would be uptake of this. When Black Mirror is at its strongest, it is using believable technological advances to explore who we are as people. The technology itself is nowhere near as interesting as our reaction to it. For example, the creation of Twitch TV is an impressive technological achievement, but it's nowhere near as revealing, fascinating, or worthy of discussion as what people use Twitch TV for and what's popular on it. Now, to try and bolster the intellectual credibility of this channel, let's talk about Belgian artist Renee Magritte. Renee Magritte, whose work you can easily find by googling weird apple face suit business guy, explored this concept with his photographic art that he was doing in the late 20s to the mid 30s. Renee Magritte uses cameras, a piece of technology which could quickly give a detailed, realistic, and objective record of a person, and used it to deliberately obscure himself. With the camera recording him, Magritte obscured his face or turned his back completely on the camera, and this surrealist work is jarring, but it's really effective because what he's doing here is implicitly highlighting the telos of the camera by rejecting it. Now, it feels wrong, it feels weird looking at these, because why would you take a photo of yourself in which you're hidden? Why frustrate the technology and its purpose? Why frustrate the audience? Now, I am obviously not foreshadowing anything here. Move along, citizen. Part of the reason Black Mirror works so well is that Charlie Brooker explicitly understands that science fiction is a way of exploring human nature and not advanced technology. That is not the primary focus. He named Black Mirror after the ability to see a dark reflection of yourself in a device when you're not using it. Now, of course, you can avoid this slightly disturbing reflection if you just play some content, maybe a game or something. And luckily, there's so many thousands of hours worth of content on our interconnected devices that basically you never need to avoid the distractions and you can be permanently occupied. You never need to face yourself or have any kind of reevaluation. Thanks, technology. Returning to the stronger uses of science fiction, the writer for this episode, Jesse Armstrong, depicts a very believable technology and, more impressively to his great credit, the very believable and frankly kind of inevitable response to it. If something makes things immediately convenient, we are going to adopt it, just longer term costs be damned. Hence, contactless payments are now pretty much ubiquitous and cash is increasingly rare. But don't worry, neutral fact checkers have assured me that this is absolutely fine. There are going to be no long-term consequences, so don't TED out over it, just chill. More depressingly, if something feeds our narcissism, it's even more likely to be adopted. These tendencies are easily manipulated. In the 20th century, the problem of being frustrated by the slow nature of elevators was resolved not by making elevators that moved quicker, but by installing mirrors in them. When people could be engrossed in the Drost effect, speed was just less important. You couldn't get a better example of high time preference and narcissism being the driving factors in technological adoption. Yeah, I know it's Drost and not Drost. I liked the rhyme. I thought it was funny. Please no bully. We already have the phrase replaying events in our head. The grain just makes it literal. It's all entirely credible, from people popping memories on for mutual enjoyment to the more sinister use of replaying memories to win an argument, humiliating someone by using their own words against them. Think of the classic Twitter "this you" retweets.
Because when you told me about Mr. Marrakesh, it was a week.
No, I didn't.
What about you?
I don't want to see our first time right now.
Now, Jesse Armstrong and Charlie Brooker really understand people, and not in a sugar-coated, idealised way. They know that people would install a grain if they could, and that it would result in things like this. This is the surface horror of the episode, and yes, that is a pre-Doctor Who Jodie Whittaker. I love that this episode not only takes the mass adoption of the grain as a given, but it also knows that people would end up looking down on anyone who didn't follow the next technological advancement and get a grain installed.
This is Hallam.
Hallam here, a guest at the party, has had a grain forcibly cut out of her in a targeted mugging, a crime common or notorious enough to be known as gouging. She then chooses not to have a grain reinstalled to remain natural, as it were, which eventually starts to ruffle feathers at the gathering.
Hallam doesn't have a grain.
Now, I love how much the superficial pseudo-tolerance of the group gives way to genuine upset really quickly.
Was that a political thing?
No, I was gouged about 12 months ago.
Jesus, was that painful?
Total agony. But the thing is, after I was gouged, I didn't have one for a few days, and I just kind of liked it.
I guess Hallam's decision really went against the grain. Fine.
I mean, it's a big thing now, right? Like, going grainless.
I believe it's huge with hookers. I mean, no offence. I'm sorry, but I couldn't do it. You know, half the organic memories you have are junk, just not trustworthy.
Colleen works in grain development.
With half the population, you can implant false memories just by asking leading questions in therapy.
I especially love that this guest, with her very obviously rustled jimmies, condemns Hallam's choice to go grainless by citing studies and statistics about how flawed we are and how unreliable our memory is. Black Mirror perfectly captures the rather unpolitic observation that there is a prevalent, empowered, progressive mindset that views humans as flawed and in need of improvement via technology and managerialism. Progress can perfect us, just a few more interventions. I don't know, maybe Charlie Brooker's been watching some Serenity, who knows?
They'll swing back to the belief that they can make people better, and I do not hold to that.
Let's now look at the surface horror of the entire history of You, and it's also going to give us a chance to do a bit of a plot recap if you haven't seen it. Obviously, we're going full spoiler mode, so just warning you. In the party, Hallam told us about gouging to get people's memories, to get their personal data. That is a really visceral description of a very unpleasant experience that is very evocative horror. You can imagine the gouging, you can picture it, it gets a wince response. That is classic surface horror. And we've seen the disturbing visual here of what should be a vital, passionate reality, a moment of connection, being replaced by sterile, technologically enhanced simulation. And if any of you use that sentence to insult my beloved Tofurky or Quorn, I will ban you so hard. We also open with a bit of surface horror right at the very start. Our protagonist Liam is being interviewed, a relatable experience that makes us empathise with him. Later on at the party, where he's very obviously an awkward outsider, that is another attempt to make us sympathise with him, even though he has fully earned the ostracism and banishment due to his absolutely piss-poor sartorial choices. Look at those socks, he deserves it. Back in the interview, we very much need that sympathy with him because Liam immediately fails a moral test. His company sees an opportunity to use grain-recorded childhood memories to justify people suing their parents for subpar child-rearing performance. Black Mirror sees that some humans, given an opportunity, will exploit it, no matter how dystopian. If the option is there and the condition is right, people will take it. The thing is, the tech isn't the problem. We are. If we weren't like this, if we didn't have these flaws, we wouldn't think of using the technology in that way. This new form of legal action, of setting children against their parents, it's a subtler form of surface horror, and for me, it's very effective. As a sidebar, we might consider that the hypothetical lawsuit is somewhat irrelevant. You could very easily argue that the subpar parenting began the moment that they decided to install a grain in their newborn. Now, the idea is quite strong and it's going to be recycled and reused and expanded upon in a later episode of Black Mirror, in the season 4 episode Archangel. Here, it just gets a very brief mention, but I think it's quite telling and quite handy for the analysis. We also see the inevitable collusion with the government, as Liam is living in a surveillance state now. People agree to let the government have full access to everything they saw and experienced in order to simply board a plane. Do you have any doubt whatsoever that a law mandating this kind of access to your memories would pass with enthusiastic press and public support now? You really shouldn't have. Now, heading to the previously mentioned social event, our protagonist has to redo a memory to remember the hostess's name, and she has in turn forgotten him. The grain tech means that they don't make as much effort to remember people. Question for you, now that you have a mobile phone that can save contact details, how many people's contact details do you remember? Pre-mobile phones, I used to know a couple of dozen phone numbers for the people closest to me, but I just don't make the effort anymore. On my first viewing, the initial reaction to this was that it was a neat bit of irony that in an age of absolutely perfect memory preservation, this guy is still completely forgettable, but I think actually it's a much smarter point than that about how technology ends up affecting us and enabling us to be lazy. At the party, Liam is upstaged by Jonas, a confident Chad whose willingness to push the boundaries of the conversation and be the life of the party massively contrasts with Liam's awkwardness. We see a darker side to the protagonist as he obsessively analyses and replays the interactions between his wife and Jonas. His spiteful, needy traits become obvious as he tries to get his wife to join him in his excessive hatred of Jonas, enabled by the grain tech that allows him to obsess in Ultra HD.
He's a bit of a knob, isn't he? A bit of a dick. Jonas.
The presence of a perfect recording doesn't assuage his paranoia, his innate possessiveness. It just channels it. Maybe it's my Luddite tendencies, but in light of this, Hallam's decision not to replace her grain and remain natural is looking pretty clever. Oh no, wait, she's a thought. Disregard. Off to the thought shack with you. Our protagonist's obsessive vindictiveness escalates to intense domestic arguments, spitefulness, and later just straight up assaulting Jonas in a drunken maelstrom. And it's all very well depicted, it's all very unsettling and effective, but it's very much surface horror. The episode builds on that and becomes even more effectively unsettling when it adds the moral complexity that our protagonist's obsessive instincts are actually correct. His suspicions were right.
18 months ago in this room.
After an intense argument 18 months ago, Theon had cheated on him with Jonas, right there in their bed.
We went for a drink.
I got drunk. It shouldn't have happened.
Yeah, he's vindicated. He has been proven correct, but so what? I mean, what does being right get him here? After this very intense and unpleasant experience, Theon leaves and we get this final bit of surface horror, but I'm going to save that. We're going to cover that at the end. That is our closer. But now that you know the premise and the plot, we can discuss the real gold, the hidden horror.
You know when you suspect something, it's always better when it turns out to be true.
What is so effectively unsettling about this episode is deeper than gore, domestic violence, or a protagonist's paranoid decline. The idea that touches a nerve right in the centre of your brain and really unnerves you and keeps you on edge long after is the idea of an objective, all-seeing record of all our deeds. The hidden horror is the idea that our carefully managed self-image can be destroyed by something with a complete record of everything we've actually done. This deep hidden horror is only possible because, in fact, on some level, we're all actually ashamed of who we really are.
You're a bitch. I'd like you to erase that. You're a bitch.
We're ashamed that we've all transgressed, we've all failed, we've all been spiteful, lazy, we've been cruel. In short, we've done things that we can't defend or justify, that we wouldn't want anyone to know about. We don't even want to acknowledge it to ourselves. But the grain cuts through this. It is an all-seeing record of our failings and our trespasses. And in that sense, the grain is also kind of a technological advancement on social media, as it removes the control that social media platforms give us over our public image. The reality is that we're all very naturally transgressing beings. We're all naturally imperfect, but our natural and inherent narcissism tries to hide this fact. We're actually very ego invested in denying it. And social media has really been enabling this. In a way, social media is wait, I know how to describe it. It's as if someone was given a piece of technology which could quickly give a detailed, realistic, and objective record of a person, and used it to deliberately obscure himself. If you recall, earlier we were speaking about Renee Magritte and looking at his lesser-known photographic work. Magritte you probably know better from this image, which is highlighting the separation between the simulation, or the signifier, and the reality. Sitting up out in peep means this is not a smoking pipe, and that is correct. It is not. This painting is just a selective representation of one. Now I raise this because on social media, we are creating a selective representation of ourselves. We do it outside of social media too. We hide the unpalatable aspects of ourselves from people that we want to impress. But that is not really us. It's not who we fully are. And, this isn't even really me. This is like the 5th take I've had to do of this because I keep messing it up. This isn't even a martini, it's just water because I'm filming this at 11:30 in the morning and I just like the aesthetic. I'm sorry to break the illusion there. We want to control the selective representation of ourselves because we really, really do not like the reality of ourselves as flawed, transgressing beings, and not quirky. And when I say flaws, I don't mean quirky, relatable things like, whoopsie, skip the gym again to finish this rosé and Disney Plus binge. No. I'm talking about very deep fundamental failings that hurt us and hurt the people we care about. We hide from this, and the idea of something we can't control, seeing and recording it, is deeply terrifying to us. And this is what makes a hidden horror of the episode so effective. If something about that is sounding very familiar to you, you are not wrong. This episode, The Entire History of You, is presenting a technological, modernized reframing of a very old concept for a newly aggressively secular age. And in that reinterpretation, it's gaining a new meaning and new horror. This old concept is going to be very familiar to anyone who received a Christian upbringing and wouldn't be surprised with the idea of man in general as being flawed, fallen, and sinful. My state primary school had a daily act of worship, and over probably 1,000 recitations of the Lord's Prayer, I was repeatedly asking to be forgiven of my trespasses, as I forgave those who trespassed against me. I should probably specify that I'm not trying to preach here, I am not aiming to proselytize, but I am interested in noticing that this long-established concept of an all-seeing judge has resurfaced in a secular skin after being banished as out of touch. Now, a far smarter cookie than me, Aaron McIntyre, has tweeted that periodically progressives reverse engineer healthy sexual behaviour and they act like they've discovered Atlantis. In this episode, perhaps the writer Jesse Armstrong reverse engineered his way to the Christian concept of an all-seeing God watching over us, but via the current technocratic paradigm. I mean, how else could that instinct be expressed in this age?
Could you just rewind me your last 24 hours? Quad speed there for me, please.
Now there is that final bit of surface horror that I mentioned, and it is a doozy. In the final scene of stark, gutting horror, our protagonist is unable to live with himself and his failings and his memories of Theon, who has left him after this confrontation. His self-image is destroyed, and very significantly, he's left looking in a mirror, facing himself as he truly is. In the analysis that I'm presenting here, we have two ways of looking at this situation. In the Christian worldview, his flaws are already known. There was never any hiding his sins. In the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector, we see a Pharisee parading his public image of himself, how he wishes to be seen, and he's contrasted with a publican who is under no illusion about his flaws and prays simply, "God be merciful to me, a sinner." Jesus says that the publican was righteous and that everyone that exalts himself shall be abased, and he that humbles himself shall be exalted. Jesus knows our sins and loves us anyway, providing a path to salvation and forgiveness. This is a vision of hope, reconciliation with the truth, and salvation. But in Black Mirror, that is not an option. Our protagonist can't reconcile his true self and the version of him that he wanted to be. He can't anesthetize himself with alcohol anymore, and the memories that reveal the truth keep recurring. So he cuts away the memories. As he can't live with the record of who he really is, he can't live with the truth, he reaches for a blade and gouges himself, removing his grain and cutting himself off from those memories. The truth is still there, but all he can do is blind himself to it. This is the end of the story. There's no resolution here. There's no redemption. At the episode's end, we are left in stark silence, cut off from Liam's world too, and the credits play out. The surface horror is obviously there and unmissable, as he's forcing the razor in behind his ear, hands shaking as he fights a natural instinct to stop. But the hidden horror hits you as you realise that he has no escape. He has no redemption in this scenario. Now, this is probably not the interpretation that Charlie Brooker or Jesse Armstrong intended for this episode, in which case, screw those guys, we're going full death of the author here. The fact is that many an analyst has pointed out that our deeper instincts and fears find their own way out into our art, irrespective of conscious intention. And so I see this episode, The Entire History of You, as a secular progressive reverse engineering the Christian concept of God watching over us, of the fear of the Lord. However, as this is a secular atheistic worldview, the Lord is gone. You only have fear.
Total agony.
That was such a downer ending that I feel really weird saying I hope you enjoyed it, but I'll instead say I hope you got something from my interpretation of Black Mirror there. I was very much inspired by an excellent channel by the name of Last Things. I've linked his Black Mirror analysis in the description of this video. If you don't know Last Things, he is absolutely fantastic. A very deep thinker with a really good presentation. I really recommend you check him out. Returning to this humble channel, if you did enjoy the video and you'd like to see more from me, do help the channel to grow. You know how to do that. It's just clicking the like button, subscribing if you're not already subscribed, and sharing this video with people you think might appreciate it, and telling them what you liked about it. I'd certainly welcome more people on here seeing my stuff, and if you want to go beyond that, well, you can leave a tip on this video, or ideally, you could join this channel as a member, or if you want to keep your money out of Susan's pockets, you can go on Subscribestar, and if you do that, you'll get access to early release of content and some exclusive content. One of the things I'm really enjoying sharing at the moment is some of the Easter eggs that I hide in my videos. That's always fun. Some of them were a little too subtle, so it's been nice actually getting to reveal them. These edited videos don't come out regularly because I tend to save them for when I have something that I feel is quite unique to say, and I put a lot of effort into them. But if you want to see me more regularly, I stream every week, currently on a Thursday, but usually on a Tuesday. Just check the channel and you will see announcements. And if you subscribe and click the bell, then you will absolutely not miss any of the live streams. I'm going to leave it there. All right. Thanks, y'all. Tschüss.